Okay, we're talking about timing on Arctic Cat 400 and kind of how to set up your cam, how to assemble it here, because there's a very specific order you need to do this. First thing I would do is just double check that your chain is in the guide down there, which this one is. I got tied up with a wire. This guide isn't in this side yet, so you can see if it'll focus. It's not really focusing well for you, but it's on the gear down there. That's very important. Next thing you're gonna do is come around to the other side of the machine. This is kind of a pain. And verify that timing mark is in the center of this hole. You see there's an arrow up there for it to line up with. If it's not exactly perfect, that's fine. This one is just a little bit. You're going to wiggle a little bit the wires. You're going to have your tensioner is going to take up a little bit of that slack. Okay. I have it wired in place here. So this is behind the recoil. I also externally marked close to where it was at, so it's easier for me to find that later on. All right. Now, let's go over here and talk about the order which you're going to have to do this. Okay, so at this point now, you're good to slide the cam in. What are we going to look for? On the cam, there's these marks. So those horizontal marks across, you want them to line up with the mating surface there. And I'll show it here in a second when I have it in. All right, and then that B is going to be towards the bottom. All right, so what you need to do is keep this gear loose on the front of here. Slide the snout in between the chain, and then put the chain on the gear, starting with the forward side of the motor. Now I'll pause this, I'll get that set up, then I'll show you here. All right, one thing to note, it's vital that when you set this in here, that this gear and this cam are put in at the correct position. Now, I bumped this cam a little bit since I took the gear off of it. This gear, there's a recessed portion of it, and you're going to want that towards the rear. All right. So this 38F is going to be towards the front. I'm going to spin this cam and get it in position there. Okay. So this gear is off the recessed portion right now. At this point, you have to put in this chain guide on this side. There's already a chain guide over here. It's held in a machine spot right about here in between the head and the cylinder. So that one goes in before the cylinder ever goes in. This one here is just held in with a screw through this hole. So I'll get that dropped in now. Okay. But if you don't drop it in with this cam gear off the front, there's not enough room to fit this in between the gear and the head with the shape of this. So you have to do this now, and then you can go ahead and put the gear on the cam. So I'm going to do that quick. All right, so we got the tensioner in. Or not the tensioner, but this guide. The tensioner does push on this guide. So from right there in that hole. But we got the gear up and on, and it looks like we're off a little bit. Probably a tooth. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the gear loose. I'm going to skip the chain one tooth, put it back on. We'll see where we're at. All right, so we were off by a couple teeth, actually. Let's see if we can show that. That's not absolutely perfect, but I don't think our mark on the other side is absolutely perfect either. From us pulling around on that chain. Our mark isn't even in the window. Let me get that mark back in the window. All right, we got our mark centered in our window there. You can see it right there. come back to the other side. One thing I like about Polaris is it's all on the same side. And we're about as perfect as we can be. There is a little bit of play in this. So, yep. Not going to get any better than that. So, at this point, I'm going to go ahead and start with putting the retainer on the cam gear. So that can't go anywhere. And then I'm going to put the tensioner on. So, when you go to put the retainer on, let me grab that here. This is the retainer on this cam that keeps the bolts from backing out. You just bend these tabs up, keeps them from being able to spin, but it also covers this pin. So when you put this in, what I do, you shove a rag in the hole so your bolt can't fall down. Leave this loose so then you can swing it under later. But you're going to have to spin it to get to the other bolt hole on here. So once you're in time, you should be okay to sit and spin this thing. Also at this time, I'd go ahead and put the keeper in your cam. There's this little keeper. It goes here. It sits in this groove, and then you spin it around, and there's a spot in the head there for it. So you spin it under, and now your cam's locked. It can't move forwards or back. So I'll get this on. Oop. And then I'll show you what that looks like installed. I'll probably put the tensioner in. That stuff's pretty easy to do, so I'm probably not going to show putting the tensioner in. And then we'll spin the motor over a few times, make sure it's still in time. And then that's where we'll conclude this. This is just a tip. I was talking about putting a rag in. Shove a rag in, because these little bolts here are what hold that retainer on the cam. Leave this one loose for right now until you spin the motor around to put this other one in, because it needs to swing over and block off that keeper. Obviously pull the rag out before you go spinning it over, but putting the rag in so you don't drop these tiny bolts in there. Also, the manual does call for using Loctite, so make sure you double check that. Okay, one thing about this tensioner, you want to make sure that it's unloaded when you push it in, when you put it in. So you got to hold that down, and then make sure that latch side is up when you go in the hole. When you put in the spring, that pin and spring will release that ratcheting mechanism and allow it to go in with just the pressure of the spring pushing on it. Alright, so one thing I did is I put a drop of assembly lube on each one of these cam journals, including this front snout, and rotated it a few times. Tensioner's in. This is bolted up. You can see what that's supposed to look like, where it's partially covering that pin so that pin can't come out. You just knock that tab over. When you take it apart, you'll see that. Be aware, this little keeper, when you're rotating it, wants to come out. So let's take a look here. Well, that to me is about as perfect as you're gonna get. That is much less than a tooth. And we come over here. Let's see if I can get this aimed in the hole. There we go, our mark centered, right in line with the arrow. That's about as perfect as you're gonna get. So I'm making this video because the first time I did this was extremely frustrating going back together. It's a very specific sequence for getting this right, without having too many chain issues getting this set up. So hope this helps somebody. I know it would help me if I'd have been able to have somebody walking me through the exact way or the exact order to put these things in up here. So anyways, have a good day.